Alright, welcome back to overview of curriculum development. Now this actually should be the final video part. And what we just finished discussing was a task analysis. It's an assessment. Right? You identify the steps that comprise a behavior chain that consistently, inconsistently, or don't occur at all. It enables you to identify or break a chain into its component responses that you can teach one or more steps at a time. It also helps you decide on a chaining procedure you would use to teach the chain based on the results of the task analysis. And a behavior chain, to be distinguished from a task analysis, is a series of responses that occur in a fixed sequence every time the behavior occurs. So the task analysis is the assessment. The behavior chain is the target behavior you're assessing. And the data from the task analysis are used to select a chaining procedure you would use to teach the behavior chain. A behavior chain should not be confused with a response chain. You'll see that in various texts. It's an outdated concept, so don't use it. It implies that one's own behavior can function as an SD to evoke a subsequent response, but that is not conceptually systematic within a behavior analytic framework. There's simply, as far as we know, there's no such thing as a response chain. We should be thinking about behavior chains. Behavior chains consist of component responses that occur. Well, we'll see them here. We'll show you the critical features. The chain is maintained by a terminal reinforcer produced by the last response in the chain. Okay, along the chain there are these what we call links, and I'll talk about them in a moment, and each link also serves as a conditioned reinforcer, but no single link in the chain can maintain the whole chain. The only consequence or reinforcer that maintains the occurrence of the behavior chain in the future is the terminal reinforcer, which is produced by the last response in the chain. Responses almost always occur in the same order every time the behavior occurs. In reality, there can be some variation depending on the behavior chain. Each response in the behavior chain is separated by an SD, a discriminative stimulus, which A functions as a conditioned reinforcer for the preceding response, and B evokes the next response in the chain. So where this may get confusing is when I use the word behavior and I use the word response. So a behavior chain consists of a series of responses that occur in a fixed sequence. So when I say response here functions as SD functions as a conditioned reinforcer for the preceding response, I'm referring to the response within the chain that produced that SD. Okay, and the SD evokes the next response in the chain. I'm going to give you examples that will make sense of all this. Variable features are that some chains are comprised of more responses than others. You may have a chain that just consists of 2 responses, or a chain that consists of 20 responses. They may be maintained by unconditioned or conditioned reinforcement, meaning the terminal reinforcer of a behavior chain may be learned or unlearned, and may contain some steps that are brief or extended over time. I'll give you examples in a bit. May or may not involve other people. And so here are some examples of behavior chains. Washing your hands, tying your shoes, ordering a burrito from Chipotle, opening the door to your home, using your cell phone, mowing the lawn. These are examples of behavior chains. Right. Another one is a student putting their belongings in a cubby and walking to their designated seat in class. So let's look at some terminal reinforcers that would maintain these chains. Well, for washing hands, the terminal reinforcer would be clean hands. That would be the consequence that reinforces the chain of hand washing. And then you have cooked food. Cooked food would be the reinforcer that would maintain using a microwave. And then access to the next tabletop activity, or perhaps some kind of acknowledgement or praise from a teacher, would be the terminal reinforcer that maintains the behavior of a student walking into a classroom, putting their belongings in a cubby, and sitting at their designated seat. Okay. So let's contrast some brief and extended responses. An example of brief responses within the chain of shoe tying could include crossing the laces, or pulling them tight, or making a loop. Extended responses, let's say, I'll give you some examples of extended responses with regard to using a microwave to, let's say, heat up some leftovers, waiting for the food to heat in the microwave after you've pressed start. That would be an extended response, a response that's extended over time. Let's see here. An example of a behavior chain that involves other people would be obtaining your coffee from the barista at the coffee shop. So for example, you may be waiting around after you order your coffee, and you don't actually go up and try to get your coffee until someone calls your name. When the barista calls your name, you walk over to the cup. When you see the cup, you pick it up. You do something to verify that that's your coffee, and then you take a sip. Right? So let's say having coffee in the mouth is a consequence, terminal consequence or terminal reinforcer that would maintain that entire chain, which involves other people because someone has to give you, someone ends up giving you your coffee, or announcing that it's ready for you to pick up. So let's look at another example of a behavior chain. This one doesn't involve other people. Let's look at those variable features as I give you some examples here. So variable features are conditioned reinforcement. One step is extended over time, and this behavior chain doesn't involve other people. So mowing the lawn now also what I didn't mention yet is that a behavior chain is evoked by an establishing operation. Remember, an establishing operation is an antecedent stimulus, condition, or operation that has two effects, a value-altering effect and dimension-altering effect. The dimension-altering effect is that it momentarily increases, or let's say momentarily alters dimensional quantities of behavior. In this case, it would be an antecedent that momentarily increases the probability I would mow my lawn. And now, establishing operation also has a value-altering effect. Okay? And the value-altering effect in this case is it's going to increase the value or effectiveness of the terminal reinforcer for mowing the lawn. And so the lawn mower is always there, and the grass is there. I could mow the grass anytime. In other words, the SDs are always present. But I don't mow the lawn all the time, right? Just like I don't wash my hands all the time. I only do that under conditions where there's an establishing operation. Okay, so the establishing operation in this case is long grass in your yard. You're going to be more likely to mow the lawn if the grass is long, right? So the first SD is this, in my case, I'm going to tell you about my situation, is the storage shed where the lawnmower is. The storage shed is an SD, meaning it's correlated with the availability of reinforcement in the form of access to the lawnmowers, which evokes walking to the storage shed. Okay, so there's the storage shed. It evokes, in this case, opening the storage shed. Okay, so that's the first response in this chain, the way we've task analyzed it. So the storage shed evokes opening the storage shed. So I open it up. Maybe I put the combination in the lock and open the lock too. Now that response produces a change in the environment. Now the storage shed is open. Open storage shed is another link in the chain. This link is going to evoke the next response in the chain, but also an open storage shed is a condition reinforcer for the response that preceded it, which is the response of opening the storage shed. Okay, so I open the storage shed. It results in an opened storage shed. Now that SD evokes obtaining the lawnmower, which is inside the storage shed. So the second response in the chain is I obtain the lawnmower. Now that results in access to the lawnmower, which is a condition reinforcer for obtaining it. And access to the lawnmower is an SD that evokes removing the lawnmower from the storage shed. Right? That's the third response, which produces another condition reinforcer. If the lawnmower is now removed from the shed, that means it's right there at the grass ready to mow. But that's a condition reinforcer that reinforces the behavior of removing the lawnmower from the storage shed. Then it evokes holding the lever with the left hand and pulling the string with the right hand to start the lawnmower. So there's the fourth response in the chain, the way we task analyze it, and so forth. And we can go on until ultimately it produces the terminal reinforcer, which is short, fresh cut grass in my yard. Here's a non-example of a behavior chain. Now this is called a response class hierarchy, this non-example. So I'm contrasting behavior chain with a response class hierarchy. If you want a review of what an RCH is, you can check out a review that I published, Silbon Falcomata 2018. So here's a dead car battery. That's the situation. The establishing operation is when you turn the key in the ignition, the engine doesn't start. So engine not starting is an EO that evokes you doing a variety of things. You could turn the key some more. You could angrily hit the steering wheel and curse. You could call a tow truck. You could check under the hood. You can sit and cry for a while. You could Google, what do I do if my car won't start? Now notice that you can engage in any of those responses, and they're going to occur with various differing probabilities. Some are going to be more likely than others that you're going to try those responses first. There are going to be some of these responses that you're going to try, or they're going to just be less likely to try. That's a response class hierarchy. Reinforcers for these responses can vary. Okay, so there's no terminal reinforcer because there's only what I mean by reinforcer for these responses can vary. It means that some responses will produce the reinforcer sometimes, and others will produce the reinforcer at other times. So in other words, there isn't any one response that's necessarily going to produce the reinforcer in any given certain situation. Responses can occur in any order, right? So they don't have to occur in a particular order. There's no single response dependent on a change in the environment produced by another response. Okay, so this is a response class hierarchy, not a behavior chain. A lot of times in academics, problem solving is best classified as a response class hierarchy, where the student varies the strategy or they're responding until they arrive at the correct response. Here's another example of a behavior chain. This is getting lunch at the cafeteria. Now, variable features are unconditioned reinforcement, multiple steps extended over time, waiting and walking, and then this one involves other people. So you have an establishing operation, which is the passage of time since the last meal, and some physical activity. The first SD is the school bell rings, signaling lunchtime. Teacher says it's time. It's lunchtime. Line up. So that evokes the first response. Line up at the front door of the classroom. Now that response produces a second SD of being in line, and the teacher opens the door, letting the students walk down the hall. So that is a condition reinforcer for lining up at the front door of the classroom, and it evokes walking in line with other students. Now that response evokes the presence of cafeteria entrance, which reinforces walking in line with other students, but also evokes stopping, walking, and then standing in line. Well, if you're the student, right? And then that response evokes the teacher telling the student that they can get a tray. Okay, so they walk over and they obtain a tray and prepare to receive foods from the lunch lady, and so forth. We can go on. Terminal reinforcer is food items on the tray. So the steps of conducting a task analysis are: 1, to perform the task and note each step. Then you watch someone else competent perform the task and note each step. So you can have another student do the task, or a paraprofessional or a teacher or someone else. If you're in a clinical setting, you can have one of the line therapists perform the task, or you can ask a parent or a sibling to perform the task, and then you watch the learner attempt the task and note each step. Note which steps they complete, which steps that if you repeat this if you do repeated trials of watching the learner attempt the task, then you can note which steps they perform consistently or inconsistently or not at all. Then you put all that together and you use the results of this assessment to develop the intervention. I'll give you an example of what this would look like in terms of data collection. So here's an example of behavior chaining data sheet based on a task analysis. And the task is brushing teeth, and we're using graduated guidance as a prompt fading strategy. And each column here is a trial, so it's an opportunity to practice and learn brushing teeth. And there are different cells in each column corresponding to the response in the chain. Right, so get brush, apply toothpaste, wet brush top teeth for 1 min, brush bottom teeth for 1 min, spit into sink, and so forth. Right, and on the bottom row, we have the percentage of steps completed correctly and independently for that trial. And so on trial 1, this is trial 1, trial 2, trial 3, trial 4. Trial 1, when the chain was implemented with graduated guidance, the learner needed a full physical prompt to get their brush. They needed a full physical prompt to put their brush and toothpaste away, and so forth. So they used all physical prompts were used for all responses in the chain to begin with, so 0% were completed independently. Same for the second trial. In the third trial, some responses prompting was faded. So here's a partial physical prompt for assisting the student with applying toothpaste. Here's a partial physical prompt for rinsing brush with water, but notice these are all still prompted, so 0% completed independently. Now in the next trial, two were performed independently. Look at that. So they brushed their bottom teeth for 1 minute independently, and they put their brush and toothpaste away independently. Now something else I'd like you to notice is that in general, what's happening is there's prompt fading occurring at each step, right, or at each target response systematically across trials. That reflects this graduated guidance prompt fading procedure. And look over here. So in this trial, these 3 responses were independent. This was partially physically prompted and so forth. Oh, 66% independent they were this time. Now, in the next 3 trials, the learner performed the skill correctly and independently 100% of the time. If you were graphing the data, it would look something like this. Here's an example of an evaluation of a chaining procedure based on the task analysis results. So in other words, this is an example of using rigorous progress monitoring, data collection, and graphing in the evidence-based practice of ABA to evaluate an intervention focused on teaching the behavior chain of brushing teeth based on the results of a task analysis. It's a multiple baseline design across students, student 1, student 2, and the y-axis reads a percentage of steps independent. X-axis is trials. Notice that with student 1 and student 2, baseline data showed that neither one of them were performing any steps of the chain independently. And then the intervention was introduced for student 1 first, and notice they started to show an increase in independent steps of the chain completed, but student 2 didn't. Why not? Well, because the intervention wasn't implemented yet. So then they implemented the intervention for student number 2, and notice that there's a replication of an increase in the percentage of steps performed correctly and independently. Both students mastered the skill, suggesting that indeed this particular intervention was probably a training package to teach brushing teeth with a chaining procedure. It worked for both students. So what does this tell you? Hey, if you have a 3rd or 4th student, probably use the same, try the same intervention first and see what happens. It's likely that it will be effective for them too in your class. So we're going to wrap up here with curricular format. So curricular format, there are multiple ways to construct curriculum. One way is to generate lists of skills, often organized by skill domain, which may include any of the following. I'm just going to list some characteristics of curricular formats and how to organize them, and that'll be it. So number 1 is specify environments in which the particular skill or objective will be taught. would be taught in a classroom, in a kitchen, in the playground, the library. Number 2 is the teaching activity description. So if it's going to be, if the skill is going to be taught in the library, is it going to be taught during the activity of sitting around a table with other students, or is it searching the library, or is it listening to a story? And then the person responsible for teaching the skill, is it going to be the paraprofessional? Is it going to be a parent? Is it going to be a teacher? Is it going to be someone else, a speech-language pathologist? Number 4, methods for evaluating the specific curricular item. So in other words, are you going to collect trial-by-trial data? What type of single subject design are you going to use to evaluate the effectiveness of an intervention targeting the specific curricular item? And how often are you going to, or in what way are you going to graph the data? Materials necessary for instruction. The current level of functioning, which if you're collecting data on the behavior, you can this would be your baseline data. Okay, that wraps up the unit on curriculum development. I hope you enjoyed this unit, and there's my reference. And the video, the ASR test password is going to be QE36Y. That's QE36Y. And I'll see you in class.